You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
This episode is supported by Code Comments, an original podcast from Red Hat. Be honest, do you comment your code? You know, when you're working on a project and you leave behind a small note in the code, a code comment, to help others learn what isn't clear in the code. Sometimes we leave comments for other people. Sometimes we leave comments for ourselves, a type of breadcrumbs. There's a lot of work required to bring a project from purchase to production, and the documentation doesn't always cover changing team dynamics. So the Code Comments podcast, which is hosted by Jamie Parker, he's a Red Hatter and an experienced engineer. In every episode, Jamie recounts the stories of experienced technologists from all across the industry who share what they've learned from implementing new technology. So if you're interested in real stories from real people going through real change, check out the Code Comments podcast. You can search for Code Comments in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to Code Comments for their support. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Research Saturday. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is our weekly conversation with researchers and analysts tracking down the threats and vulnerabilities, solving some of the hard problems, and protecting ourselves in a rapidly evolving cyberspace. Thanks for joining us.
As part of this research, we were looking at new and novel ways that you could leverage vulnerable drivers or drivers in general in an attack sequence.
Our guest today is Dana Behling, a researcher from VMware Carbon Black's Threat Analysis Unit. The research we're discussing today is titled Hunting Vulnerable Kernel Drivers.
Well, bring your own vulnerable driver attacks are becoming a more common on the threat landscape in general. One of the most important reasons that VMware and Carbon Black are interested in them is that drivers are commonly used to turn off security processes. And being a security process ourselves, we don't want that to happen, right? So as part of this research, we were looking at new and novel ways that you could leverage vulnerable drivers or drivers in general in an attack sequence.
Well, let's dig into the research together here. Can you give us an overview? Exactly what are we looking at here today?
So the research was initially conducted by my colleague, Takahiro Haruyama, and he was looking at a method to automate the process of searching for vulnerable drivers. When he initially created his framework for looking for the vulnerable drivers, we found such a huge number of vulnerable drivers. He ended up having to scale it back a bit. So what we did was we looked for only vulnerable drivers that could access very specific kernel resources, so a specific function call within the kernel driver framework. And what his research demonstrated was that the function call for rewriting firmware. Firmware is the software that resides on the actual hardware chips themselves. The reason that it's so important to protect firmware from rewriting is that, well, first of all, most people don't pay attention to it. Once they purchase a hardware device, whatever firmware is on it is what's going to be on it for until the device is discarded. But secondly, and even if you reinstall your operating system, that firmware will stay there, right? So if an actor is able to rewrite that software that's on the hardware itself, there's a very, very small chance that it will get upgraded to, a patched version just because people aren't paying attention to it. And secondly, it will allow the attack or whatever the purpose is for rewriting the hardware to live on until that device is discarded.
Well, let's go through the research together here. What was the process by which you all hunted these down?
So one of the most troublesome things about vulnerable drivers is that by necessity, the kernel is divided into two different sections. There's the kernel mode and the user mode, okay, in an operating system. The kernel mode is where all of the protected processes happen, and the user mode is like the public area. I consider it sort of like a bank, right? There's the public area and then there's the private area. The private area is the kernel mode, the public area is the user mode. Because hardware, the users need to make changes in the kernel mode, there's these things called IO control commands, IOCTL, which allows a user to send a command from the user mode, the unprotected spot of the operating system, into that very protected spot. And by making those commands, you can affect the kernel resources and negate all the things that Windows or Microsoft has put into place to protect the kernel itself. Takehiro's research showed that he could make calls directly to a function called mmmapIO space, which allows you to write memory directly to addresses in the real address space, because it allows you to map from the real addresses to the virtual addresses, which basically is like saying, rather than giving someone your home address like 123 Elm Street, you're giving them the GPS coordinates, and so they could write directly to that place.
We'll be right back. It's that time of year to start thinking about your New Year's resolutions and what you're hoping to achieve next year. As you start setting those 2024 goals, professional certifications should be part of your plan. Starting today, N2K is offering our full catalog of certification practice tests for just $39 each. Choose from our extensive library of certification titles from leading vendors like AWS, CompTIA, Microsoft, Cisco, and more. With over 25 years of experience in exam preparation, N2K has helped hundreds of thousands of security students and professionals feel exam ready. Visit n2k.com/certify to view our practice tests and get started today. That's n2k.com/certify.
And now, a word from our sponsor. The Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute is currently seeking qualified applicants for its innovative Master of Science in Security Informatics degree program. Study alongside world-class interdisciplinary experts and gain unparalleled educational, research, and professional experience in information security and assurance. Want to see for yourself? Student researchers will be presenting their capstone projects on December 13th and 15th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on JHU's Homewood campus. For more information about their projects and the MSSI program, visit isi.jhu.edu.
And so is this a case where there's a legitimate and needed functionality that is out there unprotected, and that's what allows it to potentially be used for bad things?
Sure. Well, I'm thinking that the reason that the original authors left that in there is so that way they would have the ability to upgrade the firmware themselves. But in this case, because it's left open to the world, anyone is allowed to, quote, upgrade the firmware, right, with whatever they want, or not at all and just make the hardware completely unusable, which was also demonstrated.
What is your sense for the degree to which this is a problem out there, how widespread this could be?
So the bring your own vulnerable driver attacks is extremely widespread. I think there's been less research into the area of firmware rewriting, which was one of the great and novel things that Takahiro was able to demonstrate. But in a larger sense, the bring your own vulnerable driver attack negates all of the patch guard and virtualization-based security that Microsoft has implemented to allow any actor to access the protected resources in the kernel that are normally thought of as being protected. And all you really need is admin access to do it, which there are numerous tools available, even on GitHub, to elevate a person's access to admin in order to enumerate all of these protected resources in the kernel that would normally not be accessible by a normal user.
Oh, you anticipated my next question, which was, what degree of access do you need to have? So admin will get you in there with no problem.
That's right. So you can, once you install the driver, in many cases for the vulnerable drivers, almost all of its resources are available to you. Microsoft does recommend that the driver authors themselves implement access protected resources and add an additional layer of security. But from what I've seen in drivers, that's very rare.
Is this a case of kind of out of sight, out of mind, where they're, I don't know, almost a security by obscurity thing, where they're banking on the fact that not many people have firmware top of mind?
I think that could be part of it. I think another part of it is that as a culture and industry, we think of drivers as these very complex things that are not understandable by the normal person. But in reality, a driver is just another type of software, just like in the user space. It uses different libraries and it has some different rules that it has to abide by. But in reality, it's just software, and it has all the same vulnerabilities plus additional vulnerabilities that other software has and that we're all very familiar with.
What are your recommendations then for folks who may be concerned about this? What sort of things can they put in place to protect themselves?
There is a website, loldrivers.io. And so that LOL stands for Living Off the Land Drivers. That provides a list of all of the drivers with known vulnerabilities. You can put those on a protected list. And if you have any of those drivers in your environment, the first thing that I would do is look to see if there is an updated version of that driver. And just like with all other software, you want to be running the most up-to-date version of your drivers. So that way you aren't, at risk of that vulnerable driver being used even without admin rights in your environment. Another thing you can do is have security products in place that are watching for new drivers being loaded. In most corporate environments, drivers should not be being installed on a regular basis. So if you do see drivers being installed, that's a very good clue that a bring your own vulnerable driver attack is, about to happen or has already happened.
Our thanks to Dana Behling from Carbon Black for joining us. The research is titled Hunting Vulnerable Kernel Drivers. We'll have a link in the show notes.
This episode is brought to you by Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business. Want to advance your career or switch fields? An MBA from Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business can help. Earn your degree from a top-ranked business school with a thought-provoking curriculum, one-on-one leadership coaching, support from experienced career counselors, and full-time, online hybrid, and accelerated MBA formats. Join the intelligent future. Visit cmu.edu/Tepper to learn more.
There's nothing worse than relying on a legacy SIM that your security team has outgrown, especially when it impacts your ability to detect real incidents. Hunter's SOC platform offers built-in, always up-to-date detection rules and automatic correlation that allows SOC analysts to focus on higher-value tasks that impact your organization. It's time to move to a platform that reduces risk, complexity, and cost for the SOC. It's time to replace your SIM. Learn more by visiting hunters.security today. The CyberWire Research Saturday podcast is a production of N2K Networks. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin. Our mixer is Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producers are Jennifer Iben and Brandon Karpf. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time.